Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Whee! Whee! Tim, can you push me on the swing? Make it go higher. Whee!
Well, sure, Tim. Here, hold on. Wait a minute. What are you doing on a swing? Are you regressing back to a second childhood?
Whee! I'm hoping the UFO will return. I want to meet the spacemen. The children saw the spaceship, and I'm waiting for them to come back since it's nearing the anniversary of the incident. Whee! Push me higher.
Okay, Tim. According to our guest tonight, children have been targeted by the aliens, having landed next to elementary, junior high, and even high schools, colleges too, I think.
Yes, and oftentimes humanoids have been seen. I guess it's because the children are so innocent, just like me. Whee!
Yeah, I don't think so, Tim.
Sure, I'm innocent, sure. Otherwise, how could you account for those aliens approaching us now?
Well, I don't know, but maybe Preston Dennis can offer us some clues. We can, hey, let's go meet him back at the KCOR studios, where we'll be safe from any alien intruders.
Well, I want to go higher and higher and higher. Hi, Tim.
I think you're high enough, Tim.
Yeah, it seems that way. I've bbeen practicing for my medical marijuana, I guess. I don't know. Hey, so how are you out there in Jasper, Indiana?
Oh, we're doing great. As always, just a little slice of paradise out here.
Oh boy. Well, I just got back from Atlantic City, where I lost my. Now, actually, we don't even gamble. We just go out to enjoy the fresh air, which I don't have very much of here in picturesque Manhattan.
No.
And it's a nice little ride out, and some great food in the resorts, and then it's back on the Greyhound to do just in time to do our show. And I think we've got a great program tonight, because we have one of our old friends on who's really knowledgeable on the subject of UFOs. We've known Preston for many years. He was a regular contributor to UFO Universe, and wrote some very great articles, and has continued to contribute to a number of books that we've published in recent times. In fact, you're finishing up now on Tim R. Swartz's incredible Alien Encounters book, and there's a very lengthy section in there by Preston on healing attributes of interdimensional beings, ultra-terrestrials, whatever you want to call them, and we'll get into that later on in the show. But Preston has a new book out, which I'm very anxious to find out about. So why don't you give us a little bit of introduction, Tim, and take it away.
Sure. Well, okay. Preston's latest book is called Schoolyard UFO Encounters, and we'll be asking him quite a few questions about that book, because it really is a fascinating topic. Now, Preston began investigating UFOs, Tim, and the paranormal starting around 1986, when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Well, since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. Now, Preston is a field investigator for MUFON, ghost hunter, paranormal researcher, and the author of of 24, and probably more than that now, books and hundreds of articles on UFOs and the paranormal. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, MUFON UFO Journal, your very own UFO Universe as well. Now, he's appeared on numerous radio and television programs, and his research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. So, Preston, thanks for being back with us again on Exploring the Bizarre.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Oh man, are you kidding? We couldn't go 6 months without talking to you, because it seems you got a new book out all the time too. Well, how did you come up with it? Now, this is a little bit unusual. Now, I know about 2 or 3 cases involving schoolyards. There's the one, I guess, is that in South Africa that John Mack went and investigated, and there's another one in Australia,
Right.
and there's one I would consider a close call involving children in Russia, where it landed in the park. I don't know how close to the school that was, but that got a lot of publicity, that particular case. And in fact, the New York Times interviewed me for an article that they did on that. But you've been researching this subject for a long time now, and you're pretty open-minded about all of this. How did you come across all these cases?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled across it. I knew about those cases you mentioned. There's a couple of other really famous cases, one in Westall, Australia, Westall High School in Melbourne.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
A bunch of kids saw that. Another case in Opelika, Florida, Dade County, at Crestview Elementary School. And, of course, the Hillsdale, Michigan incident at Hillsdale College.
That's right. Yeah. That skipped my mind. Of course, it's not a elementary school, but it was that a girls' college, or I remember seeing the pictures. The girls were looking out the window at the
right.
Yeah.
It came for the girls' dorm. Actually, there was like 87 students or so saw it. Police saw it. School administrators. It was really the incident that sparked all of this. Certainly the interest in it. At the time, Jim and Cora Lorenzen warned that they were receiving a lot of cases over schools, and at the same time, Raymond Fowler.
I got one for you. How about is it Sharon Stoll? You know that the case with a girl that grew 5.5 inches.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, Albuquerque, New Mexico. She was standing in the schoolyard, and this UFO came over, and I believe burnt her face rather badly. I don't know whether she went to the hospital or not, but I came across that today. I was thumbing through our UFO hostility book, and I remembered that case. That's always been one of my favorites. I wish that somebody had followed up on that story to see, she grew like supposedly 5.5 inches in a couple of months' time or something like that. Whether she would still blame that on the UFO that she saw.
Yeah, I'd like a follow-up too, because I know all about the case. That was Lowell Elementary School, April 29th, 1964, just a few days after the Lani Zamora landing, which wasn't far away. A very similar described craft as well. It's a great case and typical of these kinds of cases, which, your typical UFO sighting is sort of a flyby of an anomalous light, perhaps at night. These cases are completely different. They're in fundamental ways. First of all, they're targeting schools directly. It's not a coincidence. They come from, the horizon or wherever and come right over the school. They occur during the day. They last much longer than the average sighting, hours, sometimes over a period of days. They're very low level. Of the 100-some cases I found, about 30% of these objects are actually landing next to the schools, and there's humanoids coming out. 30%.
Now, what is the earliest case that you found dealing with the schools and children?
Right. The absolute earliest was a case in 1853 at Burritt College in Tennessee.
No way.
Yeah, but I have to tell you,
give us some story on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a complete outlier. I couldn't find any other cases for another 100 years. But this is a typical case. This occurred very early in the morning. A bunch of students saw two very bright lights over the college. They couldn't identify them. One was pulsing brightly and the other would become dimmer. And then they would sort of change places. It was a clear display of very unusual objects that clearly wanted to be seen.
And how many witnesses?
There were dozens of witnesses and some teachers. They wrote to a science magazine. The only explanation they had way back then was, astronomical.
Yes.
So they really didn't think about ETs and the public consciousness so much.
Uh-huh.
So
when did the next case occur?
Yeah, the earliest case I could find after that was in Prestonburg, Kentucky. This was, 1953. Or no, 1950. Yeah, it was a great case. 35 students were out on the playground. There's the teacher, Miss Holbrook, and this two UFOs come swooping down over the playground, scare the wits out of the kids. These particular objects were very loud. And the kids scattered, screaming. Some were throwing up, a few fainted. It was a big deal. And these objects just took off, and everyone was trying to get themselves together. After about an hour later, these objects returned. There was 4 of them this time, and they came much closer. They were clearly unexplained. And again, this sort of started this regular, I'm going to say every year, on the average, there's actually like 2 per year of a really close-up sighting like this, or landing over a school. And get this, half are elementary schools, half of the cases.
Well, now, which was the you said earlier, maybe we said earlier, that a lot of these cases did involve humanoids. What is the first case that you know of involving a humanoid?
A very early case in 1909, July 24th, in Kelso, New Zealand. This is sort of the end of the airship wave, which was really, at the turn of the century, but it trailed off for a number of years. And a bunch of students saw this sort of airship with a figure in it come right low over the school. It moved very quickly. And again, had this sort of behavior of wanting to be seen and showing off. And bunch of, actually, there's drawings of this thing. The kids all were taken separately and drew pretty much exactly the same thing, minor variations.
And this is in 1909?
Yep.
And what did the humanoids look like?
Just a man, a figure, human-looking figure. They couldn't really see much because it was just far enough away where you couldn't see the features. But yeah, it's a pretty early humanoid case. There's not a whole lot of early humanoid cases really at all.
Mm-hmm. And now, okay, so what would you say is the one that had the most students involved? Would that be the Wellington case?
There was a case in New Zealand by coincidence. This is all over the world, by the way. England.
Yes.
Pretty much everywhere. But there's this case in New Zealand. Let's see. I believe it was Maranui, New Zealand, and there was 400 students who saw this thing. This was Richmond School. It was a bright, beautiful, warm, sunny day. May 17th, 1970. 2 teachers were on the playground when suddenly it became completely silent, and they looked at the kids, and all the kids are looking up at this thing approaching the playground. And it was described as a huge black disc covering about a third of the sky, absolutely gigantic, and maybe 2,000-3,000 feet up most, which is, on the high end for these objects. It stayed there for a good 5-10 minutes, floated a little bit to the side, turned on its edge, and shot straight up. Now, mind you, there's an airport right next door, pretty, very close, 3-4 miles. Didn't see a thing. Or so they say.
Now, what is the attitude? I remember the one case that Dr. Mack, his was in South Africa, right, that he went to investigate?
Right, Rua, Zimbabwe, right.
Oh, okay. And I remember the children did drawings of the craft and what they observe. What is the attitude towards most of the educators? Maybe I would use that in quote. The teachers and the principals as far as the children. Okay. Before we go there, what percentage of cases would be elementary? What percentage would be junior middle school, I believe they call it, and what percentage would be high school? I mean, is there more in one division than the other?
Yeah, 50% are elementary schools, which I think is significant because, young children they're clearly targeting our youngest children. But otherwise pretty evenly divided between high school and junior high, with a few outliers with colleges. Comparatively, I would say about 10% is colleges, but so fairly well divided between all age groups.
And what has the attitude been?
As far as the students, a lot of, particularly the younger ones, have never heard of UFOs, have never, so it's a completely new experience for them, which they sort of absorb in an unadulterated way. They've got no preconceptions about what these things are. The students, by and large, are very impressed, and it's something they remember for the rest of their lives. Some of them have gone on to become UFO investigators or, physicists and quantum physicists and really into the subject, this sort of thing.
Is that right? Well, that's interesting. I mean, that would make a book in itself too. Well, I guess that's what Dr. Mack was trying to do to some extent. Is interview some of the students later on in life, which would be probably a very interesting concept and a way of seeing how their attitudes on their life and also their parents. How it may have affected their families.
Oh yeah, there's been some real trials for the families for sure, because sometimes the parents don't believe. Kind of a really interesting case in that regard comes from Leonard Stringfield, who got a call from a frantic father who says, "My son is missing. He called you yesterday to report a UFO. Is that right?" And Leonard Stringfield says, "Yes, but I wasn't home. I got the message." Well, the kid was missing. Turned out he had come home from school the day before and said a UFO followed him home, and his parents didn't believe him. The next morning, he left a note saying, "I'm leaving. This UFO is coming to abduct me." He had withdrawn $500 from the bank. He's a high school student and was missing. They called the police. They did eventually find him at Atlanta airport, brought him home. Leonard Stringfield got the whole story out of him. It turned out a year earlier, he was at high school on the playground when this object comes swooping down, telepathically communicates with him, saying, we're coming for you, type of thing, and scared the wits out of him. He went home and that night had a visitation by gray type ETs who says, "You need to come with us. Don't be afraid. We won't hurt you." The whole spiel that they give. And poor kid carried this secret for about a year and finally asked his parents for help and got rejected and took off.
Huh. Now, I do remember over the years, like when I was doing the UFO review, the official and only flying saucer newspaper at the time, and still is, I think, historically, there were a couple of cases involving rather teenagers, very young teenage. There was a 14-year-old boy, and I don't remember the specific details or the name, but he took a series of what seemed to be rather impressive photographs. I think there were 4 or 5 pictures in the series, and then there was another youngster, and I don't think he was much older, maybe 15 or 16, who did some very interesting drawings of aliens. He might have been the youngest contactee. I don't know about their education or whether any of this happened in school or not, but it seems to kind of tie in with, as you say, targeting the young teenagers or before teenagers. Do you know in any cases where kids got Is that the word? Dispelled from school?
Well, I mean, certainly there was controversies with teachers who denied the incident. In about half the cases, maybe a little bit less, teachers do see these objects.
Yeah.
And they don't often react well. I mean, about half the cases, they don't react well and completely deny it and don't want to look at it or call the kids back inside. But in some cases, I mean, like the Australia case, there was teachers who saw this. Same with the Opelika Crestview Elementary School case. Teachers have gone on record saying that this was an unexplained object, a UFO, flying saucer. And often, I mean, there was a case in Marysville, Ohio, at an elementary school where this object dropped down all this angel hair all over the playground. It was a clear display. It was right on the school. And the teachers were able to gather the stuff. The principal had it. They sent samples off to the local Air Force base. Never heard back, by the way.
Of course.
But this case was one of several which do generate interest from government officials, and did have physical evidence.
Do you know any cases where the children might have been contacted more than once? Maybe on a face-to-face basis.
That's pretty rare in terms of like following a visitation at a school than to have a humanoid visit you later. There was, the one I mentioned. I know this did happen in the Rua, Zimbabwe case. A number of the students there ended up having lifetime of contact, and this does turn up for sure in other cases as well, particularly with high school students.
And in the Zimbabwe case, what kind of messages were they receiving?
Oh, it's such a great case. It's really the ultimate case. There's like 200 kids on the playground. Some 60 children see this object land, and a smaller group see the humanoids come up, and just a handful got any communication. And it was the same message, basically, with variations for each student that did get a message, and it was environmental. And this is 1994, and one was told that, you must tell people to stop cutting down the forests. Another was warned about our warlike ways and aggressions. Another was warned about pollution. Another lady, this was all through sort of imagery and stuff. She said that the ETs told her that we were becoming too technological. There's a good way to use technology and a bad way, and we could do much better. So these were pretty clear-cut messages set on environmentalism in a time when, in Rua, Zimbabwe, certainly, it wasn't a talking point.
Now, what were the humanoids described as looking like?
In that case, short humanoids with dark uniforms, perhaps a stripe across it. Yes. One was described as, very big, dark eyes, like we usually hear, pale skin. One was described as having hair, interestingly enough, long black hair. So you get some variations there.
We're talking about space brother types then, at least in this case?
Well, not in a friendly, human-looking way. Frightened the kids pretty bad.
Well, we're gonna take a break here, and we'll be back in just our guest this evening, Preston Dennett.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight our guest is Preston Dennett, and we've been talking about his most recent book, Schoolyard UFO Encounters. And Preston, some of these cases have involved the kids seeing occupants. Are you familiar with the Malaysian accounts that took place in 1969 and 70, when the kids saw some rather unique UFO occupants?
Yeah, actually I am. There's some really good cases. In those cases, these were very tiny little humanoids, a foot high, uh, piloting an equally small flying saucer. There was one student who was apparently struck by a beam of light coming from a sort of ray gun type instrument when he tried to approach one of these things. And it was initially just his story. He showed his wound. He had gone missing, and they found him unconscious outside. But later there was further encounters in which multiple students saw these things, and a couple of encounters where teachers saw them too. They saw one of these things land on the playground, and they went running up to it. These are over a period of years where this occurred over the late 60s and early 1970s. But definitely different from your average case, perhaps here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a fascinating part about these cases, is that it wasn't just one encounter, but like you said, I mean, there were several, and they always seem to single out schoolyards, like all these other cases. Except these guys were definitely, I don't know. I mean, they're fun-sized UFO occupants, I guess.
Yeah, but I think that there's an agenda going on here, clearly. This behavior is very specific, and I think what they're trying to do is create a sort of universal belief in UFOs among the younger generation, and it's been very effective, because that's pretty much what we're seeing.
Well, okay, now that's a good point. You had mentioned in the first segment of the program some of the witnesses at the Zimbabwe UFO encounter in what was that, 1994? Just a couple of years ago, you had one of the students, a woman by the name of Emily Trim, who came forward with her experiences. And I mean, the things that she talked about, I think it surprised a lot of people, because the assumption had always been that these kids had seen the UFO, maybe seen the occupants, but that the messages, that information really hadn't gotten out too much.
Right. Yeah, it's really an amazing case. There's a documentary that's been put together that's supposed to be coming out at some point. Been worked on for many years, which will tell the whole story. It's not an isolated sighting, by the way. Most of these school sightings are part of a sort of a cluster of sightings, but usually are the ultimate case surrounding, there's sightings before and afterwards, but nothing quite like what we're seeing at these schools, which, I mean, the Rua Zimbabwe case may sound unique, but it's not. I was contacted by Ray Hernandez, who's interviewed a teacher from Colombia who describes pretty much exactly the same scenario. Messages are pretty rare. I've only got a few cases of that. But, the Rua Zimbabwe case may have involved missing time. Cynthia Hind, the first investigator on the scene, talked quite a bit about that, the possibility that there was, time distortion. And certainly that turns up in a lot of the cases.
So, okay, now you said that you think that this is possibly an attempt to actually put this mindset in children about the reality of UFOs. Nowadays, I mean, here we are, 2019. I think that more and more people are very well aware of the UFO phenomena. Not everybody may be convinced on its reality, but compared to when a lot of these encounters originally took place, certainly hardly anybody even, considered the reality of UFOs. Now, look at us today. I mean, do you think that there is a correlation here taking place?
Oh, yeah, there clearly is. I mean, we have UFOs leading our box office, science fiction, aliens, this sort of thing. It's all over our video games. It's the most common trope in science fiction. It's permeated our society to a large degree. And I think what ETs are doing is sort of landing without landing, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Doing sort of their best to make us aware of their presence without completely disrupting society. And children are unique witnesses in that they're going to remember this for sure, but they're also not going to be really listened to. People aren't going to take them super seriously because they're kids. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're using children. I don't want. Perhaps that's not the right word, using, but you know what I mean.
No. Well, and in a lot of these cases, I mean, you had adults and teachers who also were witnesses, yet they, most of them really balked at coming forward and saying, yeah, we saw it too. When their superiors would ask them, what did you see? Many of them said, nothing. I didn't say anything. Kids are nuts.
Right. Not always, though. That certainly did happen. One lady I interviewed, she had an experience in Missouri at Point Pleasant Elementary School. This was in 1966, which was a huge year. That was the Hillsdale sighting was then. Right. 2 weeks after the Hillsdale sighting, 2 weeks was the Melbourne, Australia, Westall High School landing. This took place that year as well at Point Pleasant Elementary School, where this, 6 students decided they weren't going to play, foursquare that day. They were going to play tag out in the field, and came upon these little tiny footprints. And they're looking at these footprints, trying to figure them out because they were humanoid, but way too small. And someone pointed, and there's this object landed in the trees. This is how it always goes down. These objects land in a grove of trees behind the school. And their first thought was ice cream truck. So they go running towards
Sure, of course. What else? Yeah, ice cream truck in the trees makes sense.
Yeah, there was no roads there. There's just a little farm. There's 4 cows. And they go running up to this thing. And of course, not an ice cream truck. It's a silver craft. It's landed. And it's got bright white lights. And there's a humanoid standing fairly close to it, much closer to the kids. They're about 20 feet away from the humanoid and 50 feet away from this object. The humanoid is looking right at them. But they all line up in a row to look at this thing. And the witness is like, have you ever heard of an ET like this? And she described this short humanoid, very large, dark eyes, but its skin was dark and had a very muscular body, which reminded her of a gymnast, really. And she said its face almost looked like a gorilla, but not quite. And I'm like, well, no, I haven't quite. It was a unique description, and this being just slowly backs up towards the ship and is walking towards it, passes a cow, touches the cow. The cow drops over, unconscious apparently, and suddenly the teacher is behind them screaming out of her mind. Mrs. Ohlendorf, she sees it too, and she is terrified and pulls the kids back inside, pulls the entire playground back inside. The kids rush to the window. They're looking at this, the lights. They can still see the lights in the forest there. And she closes the blinds, calls the principal, calls all the other teachers. They close the school down. They send the children home early.
Wow.
And next day, never happened. They refused to talk about it. No one will talk about it. Of course, it's the buzz of the school for, weeks.
Oh, yeah.
But the adults, no, they weren't having it. There was not a word from them.
Well, and I suppose that if there is some kind of program going on, so to speak, with whatever is the source of the UFO phenomena, possibly they've figured out that they're not going to influence adults. Their minds are closed. That it's going to be the children, the upcoming generations that are going to be influenced.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they're doing here, and that's why they're going for the elementary schools. Another great case, 1955, Whitsett Elementary School. 120 students see multiple objects. Principal is there. He sees it too, as does another teacher, and they drops a huge fall of angel hair again. This is 1 year after the Jerome Elementary School case. Kids are running around. They're picking it up. One kid stuffs it in his mouth before the teacher can stop him. It does not taste good, he said.
Well,
it was salty.
They didn't think it was cotton candy.
Oh man.
Well, it does look like that. That's how they generally describe it. But they did save a sample of this, sent it off to Burlington Labs, who couldn't identify it, said it might be spider webs. You should contact a biologist, which they did. And the biologist says, no, this is absolutely not spider webs. But yeah, the military took an interest in this case and tried to debunk it, and had a confrontation with the principal, who turned out to be a war veteran with 40 combat missions from World War II. So basically put the Air Force in their place.
Well, good for him for standing up, though, for it.
Now, Preston, you seem to take the approach that these are benevolent beings, because I know in this book that we're going to have out hopefully in the next couple of weeks, Tim Swartz's Incredible Alien Encounters, you have a quite a lengthy section in there on the people who have been healed by UFOs, and I think you mentioned earlier that your last book covered this, and your first book, and in fact, when you started writing on the subject, your first book was on healings in UFOs. So, do you see an overall benevolent plan from these beings?
Well, I can tell you without a doubt that one of the agendas, and this is very generally speaking, greys, humanoids, mantids, is healing humanity. There are simply too many cases coming from all researchers, yourself included. You've had a number of cases. John Mack, Bud Hopkins, Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith. You can't name a prominent researcher who hasn't run across these types of cases. They're just not getting a whole lot of coverage.
One of my favorite cases is and I'm sure you've written about it, and this is in our Incredible Alien Encounters book, is the police officers down in Texas. One of them had been bitten by, I thought it was a snake, but I think Tim said it was a pet alligator or something, where he was healed. His hand was outside of the window, and the UFO came overhead and I guess struck him with a beam. Right,
Deputy Robert Good. It's a
Good,
great
that's
case.
correct. Yeah. Now, was it a snake or a pet alligator?
It was a baby pet alligator. Yeah.
Tim, you're right. You won on this one. Son of a gun. I got to buy you a beer.
Yeah, it's a great case. One of those officers, by the way, was a supervisor of like 30 or 40 other officers. Great witnesses.
And that was what, in 1964?
Gosh, I'd have to look that up. I think that's about right. It's definitely one of the early cases.
Yeah. And in fact, we have I think we have don't we have a photo in the book, Tim, of the police officer?
Yes, we do.
It did, indeed. And okay, what was your first book on the healing called, Preston? And what is the last one that you've done? They have similar titles, I think.
Yeah, the first book I did was called UFO Healings. First one I ever wrote. That was 1996, and it covered 100 cases. And I got a lot of cases after that. And this new book covers 300 cases, and I had been getting a lot of requests. And that first book had become, very hard to find.
Yes.
So I put this new book out, and
I think I saw it. I think I saw it for sale on eBay for like $300 or something like that.
Yeah, that first one was getting really pricey. I'm like, hey, I can't even afford that.
There you go. Yeah, well, I've had problems with that recently on a couple of books. I said I can't afford to put this back into my own library anymore. That's why you got to hold on to these things. And what is the? Also, too, you've done quite a few books on UFOs in New York, and New York. That's almost like a whole series. UFOs over certain states.
Yeah, I think that was an important thing to do. A number of other people have taken that up for various other states, but I did New York, or California first, then New York, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and in a historical style to sort of document all this stuff, because a lot of it's getting lost to posterity. I've got all these old news clippings, all these old paperbacks you just can't find anymore. So I thought it was really important that UFOs are taken more seriously than they were being. And we're seeing that now. There's not as many debunkers out there. Now and people are allowing their names to be used. We're seeing this discussed much more freely. It was brought up in the White House press room this year. I think it was this year. There was nervous titters and laughter about it, but hey, it was brought up.
Yeah, they still, at least they're bringing it up.
Right? I mean, we've had almost no movement officially in terms of, the disclosure front, which is going to have to bust wide open at some point.
Well, now, going back to the schoolyard encounters, what is the most recent case that you've run across?
Well, in terms of humanoids, there aren't a whole lot of recent cases that I could find. The most recent really good humanoid case was in 1998 in Sri Lanka at Adakiram Primary School, where two students who would go there early to open up the school saw a landed UFO right next to the school. I mean, smack next to it. It took off straight up, and other students were coming to the school by that time, and there was these landing traces. These were very reputable students, who were eligible for scholarships and certainly not the type to lie. And multiple witnesses. And turns out the kids were very familiar with this UFO. They called it Koka, or stork, in their language, because it kept flying over the school pretty regularly. So that's a fairly recent humanoid case, or a landing case, rather. In terms of sightings, the most recent really good case I could find was April 2nd, 2018 at West Nusa School in, I believe this is Indonesia. During the day, this very bright sun-like object comes right down over the school. The teacher took a picture of it on her cell phone, but you can't see it. It's just white. So the picture didn't come out. But scared the wits out of the students. They were very impressed. Teacher was freaking out too. They had no idea what it could possibly be. Totally silent, fairly large, and went away. Just kind of took off. But what I found, I've got a number of cases from 2019, which are just not. They're like one or two witnesses. What I'm looking for is when the whole school sees it. Right.
Right. But what you're saying though is that these encounters are still occurring. This is something that happened, like back in the 60s and early 70s, and then petered out. This is something that it's an ongoing process, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. This is exactly what we're seeing. There was another case in 2015. A bunch of students saw these objects during a fire drill, and it was still out there later during theater class. Some hour later. So there's a lot of good cases all over the world. I mean, we've got cases down in Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, cases in China, cases in all across Europe, England, Canada. So it's still ongoing. I'm not quite as active as it seems like it was in the 50s and 60s. But, sometimes these cases take a while to trickle down into researchers.
Well, that's okay. Now, to me, that's an interesting though aspect of it. I mean, do you think that possibly that there was a time when there was a concentrated effort, and now we're seeing the results of it, and it's possibly the phenomenon is starting to go in a different direction for who knows what.
Yeah, it was kicked into high gear for sure during the mid-1960s when Jim and Coral Lorenzen warned people about it, as did John Keel. Raymond Fowler heard about this. He's like, I've had 16 cases, and 8 of them were over schools. And a typical case was Beverly High School, where a bunch of people saw this object come right over the school, came so low over this group of witnesses that one of them peed her pants. I mean, it was like 20 feet up. The police were called. They saw it. And this object took off over Beverly High School and went straight to Gordon College, about 2 miles away, and did a dived towards the quad there and scared the wits out of another group of students. So they're clearly they're clearly going for the kids in case after case.
All right. Well, Preston, unfortunately, we only have about 3 minutes left in the show. So why don't you let our audience know where they can find your books, your website, and as well, any upcoming appearances or anything like that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do have an upcoming appearance up at UFO Con 2020. Up in Northern California. This is like February 23rd, around there. That last weekend there. I'll be speaking actually on this subject, schoolyard UFOs, possibly the subject of my next book if it's out yet, but we'll see. You can learn more about my books and my research at my website. If you just Google my name, it should take you there. But it's PrestonDennett.weebly.com. All my books are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and hopefully bookstores near you if you can find one.
Yeah, good luck with that, right?
But yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Yeah. I really appreciate it.
Well, we are coming upon the holiday season here, and so I want to wish all our listeners thank you for listening and commenting on our show and buying our books. And I want to remind you that we have 2 books coming out, hopefully just before the holiday, which you'll be able to get either through us directly or from Amazon.com. One is Tim Swartz's book of incredible alien encounters with contributors from probably, I think, about 20, 25 contributors, Tim, right?
At least, yes. Preston being one of them, by the way.
Indeed, on the healing encounters. And then we have Timothy Green Beckley's big book. It's the UFOs Deja Vu, skinwalkers and shapeshifters and more encounters with the humanoids. And so you can look for those on Amazon or drop us an email, or you'll learn about it through certainly the conspiracyjournal.com. And again, listen to the shows in the KCOR archives. We've, I think, done about 400 interviews now. And of course, our YouTube channel is very active. It's Mr. UFO's Secret Files. And thanks again for your contribution to the world of ufology, Preston. You've done a great job, and you've been really a great researcher. And Tim and Tina, we'll talk to you next week. And thank you, Peter. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Carol. And thank you, one and all.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.